Hello, my name is Margaret Adele, and welcome to another indie book review. And this is a special one because it's a genre I don't usually like to review, but this one managed to break the mold. And that is Where Shadows Lie by Allegra Pescatore. This is a high fantasy, and that's not a genre I jump into a lot, mostly because I'm much more of a sci-fi person, and in a lot of cases it seems like so much high fantasy is following a very specific niche, and it takes a lot to convince me to take on 500 pages of a book, or nearly 500 pages, for something that's fairly standard. This one, however, is very not standard, and there were two specific aspects of the book that convinced me to pick it up. The first one being that our main character, Eleanor, is disabled. She has an invisible illness, and I don't know if this illness has a direct modern day counterpart, but we'll get into that in a little bit. The second aspect was the first line of the synopsis in this book, and that is, "The chosen one is dead." And it's like that synopsis line was written just for me, and it holds true. In the prologue of our book, we see an assassination attempt on our standard evil king, led by the young noble prince who wants to change the world, only it fails. Majorly. And it's really kind of interesting because you can almost see the book before this one that would have been your standard high fantasy where the young prince was going to join the rebellion and beat his evil father, and then it all goes to hell in this one. And I loved it. It was a great beginning. Eleanor, in a more traditional high fantasy book, more, standard, would have been this poor, sad side character that everyone was fighting to protect. And they kind of were, and it was to their detriment because no one expected her to fight back when the assassination attempt started. No one bothered to tell her, like, hey, King's evil, there's a rebellion, they're the good guys, don't attack the rebellion when they attack the king. So she just saw random dudes attacking her father and fought back and was actually part of the reason the assassination attempt failed. And that was a big theme of this book, is people make gigantic mistakes over and over again. I'm almost surprised when their plans actually come to fruition and succeed, because 90% of the time they're failing. And usually that can bug me. However, in this case, because the situation is so dire, the kingdom is flailing and the evil king and all of that, you can see the desperation behind the decisions they make, so that they're stupid decisions, even if you as a reader going, oh no, there's still 300 pages left in the book, no way is this next assassination attempt gonna work, but I get why. It's a lot more intriguing. And Eleanor, on top of being disabled, is also a lovely disaster bisexual. And for everyone wondering, the difference between a disaster bisexual and a chaos bisexual is that the chaos bisexual does it on purpose. The disaster bisexual is unwitting. And Eleanor is super unwitting, but also has this, she calls the woman her lover, but it seems kind of like a friends with benefits thing where, yeah, they do genuinely love each other, but the love isn't a forever thing almost. They're really aware of the fact that this romance has an expiration date, if only because, Eleanor's gonna have an arranged marriage one day. But I really appreciated that. The big struggle I had with the book overall and its plot actually happened in from page about 30 or so to page about 100 or so. There's this big gap where it just feels slow. And it might have been the fact that the very beginning of the book is fantastic. The prologue, the fallout from it is fantastic. It's a big, giant way to open, and then it gets slowed down for a while to the point where I'm I'm not even quite sure what we're supposed to be following. It just seems like everyone's kind of just running around, and it kind of ground everything to a halt for me almost. And then as another stupid decision is made, things pick back up again. And I appreciated it picking back up again, but that way slowing down, plus in this section, Eleanor is nothing but whiny. And obviously she's been lied to her entire life. A bunch of people she thought were real well, I mean, they're still real, but a bunch of people she thought she was really close to, turns out they've been lying to her for a long time. So yeah, like, she has reason to whine. The problem is that she doesn't do anything but whine for a giant portion of the book. So it's like, and then later on, it begins picking up, and the world building picks up again, and I don't know how I feel about that, because on one hand, I don't like the giant expositional texts of world building at the beginning of a book, but I also like knowing where I'm at. So it's kind of, you know, here or there. I do like the aspects on religion. There are these little inserts of basically like text info about each of the main 5 gods they worship and the religions that specifically worship that god, and I appreciated that a lot. As for Eleanor's illness, it almost seems like something connected to polio for me. It was based on a childhood illness she got called wasting fever in the book, and it reminded me a lot of that one mid-grade polio memoir I'd read before, the author of which I'm going to forget, cover right there. But it reminded me a lot of that with she got sick and it attacked her legs and it made it hard to breathe at times, and she had to start physical therapy while still in the midst of that illness, which is a big polio thing. And I do not know how Own Voices this is. The author is disabled, that is in her bio, but I do not know if this is supposed to be a literal representation of the disabled or disability she has, or if it's just the other ideas and concepts of being someone with a disability moving forward. Eleanor is very aware of how much her family is ashamed of her disability, and she has to work to hide it, and being princess, she's been forbidden to use a cane or a wheelchair in front of company, even when her legs are killing her and her legs require regular, like massages and stuff. My favorite was this one, like, sexy scene where her lover actually helps massage her, but because she knows the massage can be painful, she does other things while she's massaging, which I love it so much. So I really enjoyed that. I liked how her disability wasn't this big rallying cry where everyone else was like, oh no, poor baby, look at her disability. In fact, at the beginning, most of the cast hates her because they're like, you're the reason our assassination attempt failed. What the hell? The cast of characters as a whole are really intriguing. Frederick, and yes, his name does sound like something out of the Dark Crystal, is particularly complex in his love/hatred of people and his constant having to betray people. Gabriel as a character kind of felt like another generic chosen one to me a lot, including the hinting that he should be with Eleanor across the story. I'm like, we killed off the other one. Why? Let's not replace him, please. Even though the little bit I heard and saw of Willem, I did like him. It's just, I'm sorry, dude, you're too standard, you're too generic. If you were back in the story, you would take it over. It's Eleanor's time to shine. You have Farian, who is your standard, you know, tsundere, takes on the world with anger most of the time. And then you have Damon, who is one of those characters that is so trying to be morally gray, but it becomes apparent very early on that he's done so much more good than bad. Like, and that's not necessarily an issue with this story in particular, but it's like, I get kind of tired. I don't really believe that anyone in a book at this point is morally gray. Most of the time it's just a person that's done some bad things along with the good things they've done. But I really appreciated him as a general character. And then as the story goes on, as they strip away his mysterious morally grayness from him, and you see him as just the dude that's had a hard life that he is, he's a lot more intriguing to me, like by the end, including one scene where, my heart broke for him. But in general, I like how gigantic the plot was. I like how many horrible things happen and how many things go absolutely sideways. And it, well, was a little bit melodramatic at times, but I loved it. And I genuinely, like, I'm looking forward to specific things. Like, in the next book, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to see these two characters meet up again because this is going to be a big thing. And admittedly, I can see the possibility of a love triangle. and I'm not a fan. Now, because there is already so much other queer content in here, there are disaster bisexual protagonists, and there's some other side characters that I would talk more about, but they're not really a thing until like the second half of the book, and this book is just so big I can't talk about everything in general if I want this review to be under 15 minutes. But there are other queer characters, so maybe polyamory would be on the table. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of these who does she pick because she has to pick love triangles. Not a thing. Not for me. But the rest of the book has enough going on for it that I can put that aside. And I can put aside the whole our morally gray character isn't really morally gray, and how this Middle East inspired desert country feels both overly villainized at times, and then once characters enter into it, seems overly utopian. Like, it feels like it swings a little too much back and forth. It doesn't feel quite like a complete complex picture. But for the most part, I gave this book 4 stars. And considering the fact that I don't really read high fantasy a lot, that's a pretty high score coming from me. It takes a lot to get a 5-star out of me for a high fantasy. But I really appreciated this book. I think that if you already enjoy high fantasy, you will probably love this book. And if you're like, hey, I want to get into high fantasy, but I'm bored with everyone just copying Tolkien, this might be the one for you to get into. It's very intriguing. The magic system is interesting, and things are revealed over the course of the story that deepen that magic training. The magic in itself almost comes across like electricity. Like, I genuinely thought that I'm like, oh, this is some kind of post-apocalyptic world where they call electricity magic and outlaw it. But no, it's just a magic system that has like aspects of electricity woven into it. For example, the rifters, the magicians, will have like metal bracelets, and these metal bracelets help their magic like be conducted. So it's very like the property of electricity, and it has a lot to do with physics and all those kind of things. And the threat of magic being used wrongly is a big deal, which I like that. While so much magic is used to fix problems, the magic in itself also becomes a big problem, where it's like, oh, if we don't help this dude control himself, the entire city could explode. So I really like that aspect. But in general, if you like high fantasies, I think you'll like this one as well. If you're not the biggest fan of standard high fantasies, I think this could be one you enjoy, or at the very least, a good way to dip your toe into it. Like I said, disaster bisexual protagonist. The chosen one is killed off. Own voices disability rep. It's a pretty good pick if you want something very different from standard high fantasy, but with all of the good melodrama, magic systems, strange world from high fantasy that you already like. I am still closed to review requests as of right now. Hard closed this time because I have no self-control and keep asking for review copies from interesting books I see on Twitter. So I hope to get open again soon. Self-control, Margaret. But thank you so much for watching. And with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.